So what will happen is when your 15 minutes starts to get close, the orange light turns on, and then when 15 minutes is done, the red light will be on. Okay?
First of all, I'd really like to thank you for allowing me the honor of having this interview. I know you've read, it's not working.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know you've read my information. I have been in education my entire life, and I have been here in the Asheville City District since 1983, which is probably longer than a couple of you have been alive. But education really has been my passion and my life, and I feel very strongly that this is something that I have the background and the understanding to do, and I thank you for allowing me to try to be placed again on the school board.
So, anybody?
I'll go ahead. And I think just for there could be a large audience watching from home, unknown. We're still having some technical difficulties up here. So just in case, you are Martha Gartner.
Oh, I'm Martha Geithner, yes.
Yeah, just so we can get that out of the way. And you have already been on the school board now. And so can you describe for me kind of where you've been and where you think things need to go in terms of the role of the school board in the, the forward movement of the school system?
When I first got on the board, I was in a situation where I had institutional background and knowledge. And my assumption at that point was that not that I had it made, but that I had an understanding of what needed to be done. In the 4 years since I have been on the board, I have learned an enormous amount and realized that I need to continue to learn an enormous amount. We have a community that's incredibly involved and is very, 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 very helpful in letting us know what it is that we need to do. Because of our community, I think that the biggest thing we have facing us, as far as the community is concerned, is being able to do open and honest communication and being absolutely transparent. That's what we are attempting to do at this point. That's why we invited you in. That's why we invited Buncombe County Commissioners in and people in our community, because we want to make sure that we have an equitable situation for all of our kids.
And following up on that, tell me a little bit about what the school board has in mind about how to further your communication, your engagement with the community. You mentioned, the community very much wants to be involved.
Yes.
And we're only in this one community, so we can't say how that compares to any other community, but it seems like I would agree with you. What are you guys going to do different going forward around building a more robust communication and transparency plan, if you will?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because that's something that we have been working on continuously for the last year. Not doing, in my opinion, the best possible way of doing things. One of the things, and I'll give you an example, last week we had a situation at the high school. And by the time we were made aware of what was going on, kids had already gotten on Facebook, things had kind of spiraled. What we realize is that we need to get out in front of that. As a parent and a grandparent, I know that if my kid had texted me or I'd seen something on Facebook about a problem at the high school, I would have been freaked out. We realize that what we need to do is send parents an email or a text and let them know that there is a situation, that we're on it and things are being taken care of. Listening to the community. I imagine this is probably going to sound a little strange, but I have learned an enormous amount in the meetings that I've been a part of in the last, 6 months. Hearing what people have to say is very different than reading something in the newspaper or seeing something on television. When you have a face-to-face, when you have the opportunity to sit down and talk to people and hear what they say, when you hear their passion, when you hear it in their voice, that makes a difference. That's one of those things that we realize we need to do more of. We need to make sure that we are able to have those open and honest conversations with community. It's been extremely rewarding for me because I've begun to understand a lot of things about people and their needs that I perhaps would not have had I not had that opportunity.
Esther, can I follow up on the question?
Yeah, all the questions.
So I'm not the liaison to the school board, and I think, as everybody knows, I don't have children, so I don't interact with the school system very much. So my awareness of it really comes from, reading the paper and the emails that we get.
Right.
And so to this point about involvement of the larger school community, be it teachers, parents, it seems to me that it's still not working.
Right.
And I don't mean in situations like you just mentioned. I mean in the bigger conversations about what happens at the school system. So, I'll harken back to maybe this was 2 years ago when there were discussions floated around. There was the big discussion about the year-round school schedule at Hall Fletcher, and do we keep that or not? And then there was, I think, changing the grades at Hall Fletcher and changing the grades at the preschool. And again, we don't have any decisions to make there, so I wasn't deeply involved in those discussions. But I am aware, because these are the emails that we got,
right,
that the perception is that the school system was making these decisions without sufficient engagement from parents and teachers. And I guess I would have assumed that in the wake of all of that perhaps the school system would have taken a different approach the next time around, and yet here we have just sort of come off this controversy around the fence advance, which I agree in the scheme of things that the school system is dealing with, a fence at Vance Elementary School is not hugely important. But what it says to me is that the school system didn't learn how to engage parents and teachers in discussions about things that are going to impact their schools. And so you've been on the board for all of that. So my question is, how did this happen again in terms of big decisions being made about what happens at a school without sufficient involvement from the parents and the teachers of that school? And then what do you think the role of the board is in making sure that happens differently the next time?
The role of the board is to make sure that handles totally and completely differently next time. That is our role. That is why we were appointed. We are representatives of the people in our community, and that is, for me, the one place that we have not done as well as we should. Yes, I have been here for all of these and could speak to each one of these in particular if you would like for me to.
No, it's just more the bigger picture about sort of, there were some things that happened a few years ago that, to me, the learning for the school system should have been, we didn't do this right in terms of involving people in the conversation. And then we've just had this other thing that it's the same mistake again. So so that's why I sort of get to the board level and the question about the role of the board. Back in those instances a few years ago, was there a conversation at the board level about, we've got to do this better next time? When we have big decisions, here's what school system staff, here's what we as your board are telling you need to do when it comes to public engagement. Have those conversations happened? Are they going to happen?
Have they happened? Yes. Are they happening now? Yes. Will they continue to happen? Yes. And I think I mentioned that we have a very involved community. I think the Vance Elementary School, that particular event, has caused me to really take a look at what we're doing and how we're not doing it right. Fortunately for us, we've been able to work with different parents now and had conversations. When you make a mistake, you have to admit that you've made a mistake. And in our communication with the community, we have several times made mistakes. And that is something that we need to do a much better job with, and that we will do a much better job with.
I have another.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Does
I will.
anyone have a
One
burning
observation is
Let's
I-
ask a question.
I have to make the observation, then ask the question. So one observation is it doesn't seem like you have in the administrative system any kind of engagement team. And I would like to see the school system build an engagement team. I mean, I'm a parent of students in the system,
Right.
so it doesn't seem to me there's an engagement team. So if there is, it's not very engaging. So, but just one of the things that's curiosity to me is how so a lot of times things happen in the city that the council's not aware of, and
Right.
people will become outraged and will say, we don't even know that staff's making a decision about some issue. You know, there was a recent decision to stop offering Math 1 to 7th graders at Asheville Middle, and I sent an email to your curriculum folks and said, you know, I just want to know what was the process around making that decision, and they very thoughtfully sent me an email saying, you know, these 6 people made this decision. And I responded and said, you know, I'm not second guessing this decision. There's probably very good reasons for it, but there was no community engagement around making that decision. And I don't see that as asking permission. I see that as an opportunity to help educate a community about the challenges you're facing and the changes that are needed. Were you all just not aware, are you just not aware of changes like that happening in the school system, so you don't have an opportunity to say, hey, hold on, are you guys doing any community engagement around that? Or what's happening? What's happening internally with things like that?
Okay, so if I may clarify, your engagement team, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying with that. That's an interesting concept, and could you let me understand what that is?
Well, I mean, here at the city, it could be we have a whole team. So you have people that do everything from write press releases, you have people that help host community meetings, then you have an IT part of it that might design online surveys. You know, you've got to have a whole, it's a team.
Okay. I like that. We do have a team, but perhaps that's something that you could talk to me more about at some point in time. The math situation in particular, are we aware that there is the discussion of change? Yes. It's interesting, yesterday I was in a meeting with Ian Nelson, who you know is our math person, and I asked him about this. In all honesty, there was a meeting yesterday with the 6 people that I'm sure he talked to you about, the superintendent and others, looking into exactly what Math 1 is going to look like. That is curriculum. That is not something that is actually in our purview. What will happen is they will bring to us what they're planning on doing, and we will take their decisions, their discussions, and we will discuss it ourselves. What I can tell you about the Math 1 is that we are doing something that is similar to what is being done in Buncombe County. There was a comment made by someone that it was a different situation. I don't like to speak to things that I don't have a lot of information about, and in all honesty, this particular situation, I don't at this time have a lot of information. I have not had the opportunity to speak to Ian today to see what the outcome of that meeting was, but I will be delighted to let you know what I know if you would like for me to give you a
My
call
point is, you've got a handful of people having a meeting behind a closed door about a decision that affects students. Before you make that decision, I want the board to insist that there be some kind of community engagement around a decision-making process, not so you can ask permission from parents and students and teachers, but so that you have the opportunity to describe the challenges and what it is you're trying to do. What is the goal? I'm not going to come behind the experts and questioning a decision like that, but I think I still am not hearing from the board their understanding of what is needed here in terms of community engagement. So we don't have time for it here today, but I would like to learn more from you and from the board about what is the plan. You said you've been working on community,
Yes.
This engagement issue for the last year. I want to know more going forward about what that's going to look like.
I would love to sit down and talk to you about that.
Thanks.
I think that would be something very important and be beneficial for all of us.
Thank you for your time served, and thank you for continuing your service to the city of Asheville through the Asheville City School Board. As you can hear from the conversation, there are some concerns, some
Yes.
very huge concerns that the community has. And thank you for your honesty in saying that, you know, there are some needs for improvement. My question to you, I see you very often working in the community and being a voice for the community. And right now we're having a lot of conversations around the achievement gap. And just the formation of that word achievement gap makes individuals believe that there's some inherent incapability or some kind of character issue with our students of color. But I've heard you often term it as an opportunity gap.
Right.
Could you give me some information about that and your commitment to closing that opportunity gap?
It's not commitment, it is.
Sorry, I know, I'm really sorry, and,
Okay.
but we're going to be on an extremely tight schedule, and I'm sorry, and what I would ask council members is to make it a question, not, you know, try to make it a question, because I think, you know, let's not shortchange our candidates, give them an opportunity to speak, but that's an important conversation.
It's a huge conversation, and please, I would like to speak with you about that. Thank you very much.
I know we're pressed for time. I just want to say one thing since I won't get a chance to ask a question. I just want to tell you that I can appreciate your service to the community. I've been out of high school for at least 20 years. You were there for some time before then. You made a big impact in my life as well as many other students, and you have continued to make this your life's work, and I commend you for that. You have 100% attendance. You're always there. You're always showing up. You show that your heart is where it needs to be, and you're the type of person that I believe we need to keep on this board. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. So Shonda Sanford's next.
Are we keeping them?
They can come in, it's a public meeting.
Maggie, you're letting them know they can sit in.
You know, we're on a tight schedule, and I'm sure all the people in TV land want to hear.
Thanks, Gwen.
Okay, so, sorry about that. So the way this is going to work, 15 minutes, so it's a little bit like speed dating. So if you could just start out and just who you are and why you want to be on the school board, and then we'll give the city council members an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to seek an interview for reappointment. I do appreciate that. My name is Shonda Sanford, and I have been on the Board of Education for the last 4 years. I have enjoyed, for the most part, being on the Board of Education. The best part about being on the board has been I've given people the opportunity that typically don't have voices in our community to have someone that a familiar face to come and speak to, and to also help the school district with that mental and behavioral health perspective they were lacking before. We've implemented some programs in those areas that were not there before. So I won't say too much since we have 15 minutes.
Great. Do you want to go?
I'll
ask
let some other people go.
Okay.
since I'm- yeah.
Shanika, you want to ask a question?
I'm not ready yet.
Okay. Well, so one of the questions is, we as a city council get kind of after you get the email, then we get it. And a lot of this swirls around parents and teachers telling us that decisions are being made at the school system, and they're not either informed or in the loop or involved up front. What, if anything, are you all doing as a school board to improve that situation?
So, of course, communication is difficult in this community. So we are always assessing and then reassessing what we're doing with communication. We do a lot with our communications director, Ashley Michelle, to get information out, whether that's through social media, telephone calls. She works with our parent engagement coordinator, Marta Alcala Williams, who helps get that information into some of our neighborhoods that don't often get the information. We've also kind of talked about maybe getting some other communication people directly for the board to help push that communication out better. And then we have to also ask ourselves, are we not getting enough information out? Are they getting the information and they just don't like what they're hearing? So there's a lot that goes into the information piece, and we are trying to get the information out as best as we can, and we're always evaluating and thinking of new ways to get information out.
To follow up to that question, not just pushing out information, but you guys are trying to make a lot of change happen in the school system, and you have a reason why and a goal you're trying to achieve. What are you doing to engage parents, faculty, students on the front end before decisions around change are made, to help them understand and inform them about what your challenges are, what you're trying to achieve, and get their feedback before you turn around and say, and now here's the change we want to make. And I cited as an example the decision at the middle school to eliminate Math 1 for 7th graders. That decision was made by 6 people. There was no engagement on the front end, and the decision was just rolled out. And I'm not saying it was a bad decision. There was probably a lot of really good reasons for the decision, but a missed opportunity in terms of engagement.
So from my understanding, that's not a final decision that's been made.
I'm just using that as an example. There's no, I don't need, I'm saying, what are you all doing? What is your design, your plan around engagement?
So typically around engagement, every school has their own parent engagement activities or events that they have. For instance, at the middle school, they do the homework diners where they can come in, they can speak with the principal at that school, and they're welcome and open to ask any questions. Most recently, we've started, some of the schools have started targeting topics, hot topics that are, the parents are really wanting more information about, and they're talking about those in the individual schools. We have our 60 seconds that Dr. Patterson sends out every week, a communication to parents, and we oftentimes like to tell our principals to get that information out in their communications to the parents every week, and then if they have questions, to give them a person to contact so that they can have more information. But again, that goes along with our communication and having to reassess and reevaluate and think of new and innovative ways to get feedback, and not just get feedback from one population or one group of people. We need the feedback from everybody, all parents.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would, we've had examples in recent past, Hall Fletcher and the preschool, and changes that were proposed there a couple of years ago that I don't even know if they got made or not. But what we heard was these are decisions that got made that nobody was involved in. And then another recent example is the fence advance. That was a decision that got made, and there was no involvement from the people most directly impacted. And so just to press a little bit on Esther's question, how do you see a need for a different kind of engagement? Again, not just pushing information out, but inviting people in, either to help them understand or to be part of the conversation. So that's one question, is do you see that need? And then number 2, do you see it as your role as a board member to push the staff of the school system to do that differently if they're not doing it, if they continue to do it in a way that results in all of us getting hundreds of emails, and you as well, I'm sure.
Right. And I definitely do see that as a need, because if parents are saying they're not getting enough information, or if something comes up and they're not aware of it, then it is definitely on us to make sure that we do a better job of getting information out to them. Typically, the way information is pushed is through their principals, so that tells me that we need to do a better job. The central office at that level need to do a better job of getting information to their principals and holding them accountable and making sure that they are getting that information to their parents, and perhaps holding different types of events where there are more question and answer sessions, so parents feel like they are more engaged in a part of the process. So I do see that need just from the example that you gave, and also to let them know that on a board, as a board member, that we do hear them, and a lot of times things come as a surprise to us, because this is, a lot of times they're not aware that this is not our full-time job. But
Right.
when we hear those complaints, we do act immediately. I know I can say personally as a board member, I do, because I didn't know what was going on either, and I personally went out to see what they were speaking of myself. And I had a conversation with the superintendent and asked, so, well, how are you going to get this information, and how are we going to have these conversations so that they understand that this is not a final thing and that we do want their feedback. So we are looking at what we're doing, and sometimes it comes in a uh-oh moment, and we just have to take that and, apologize for not, if it didn't go out the right way, or if we didn't do things right. We have to own it and do our best to work towards doing it better the next time. So yes, I do see that as a need.
Shauna, this has been one hell of a year for the school board, and I think you're hearing some of the top concerns, and I think these are concerns that have been echoed through numerous emails from one segment of our parent community. What is your plan as a school board member to help remove the barriers for other parent communities to be vocal around the achievement gap, our disciplinary actions, and access to other services within our school that will help close what we're calling now the opportunity gap?
So we have to figure out a way to engage those parents and make sure those parents feel welcome coming into our schools. Obviously, they don't feel welcomed if they're not showing up. We have to not necessarily expect them to always come to us. We need to be going to them more often. They may not be getting your emails or your phone calls, or they may not want them. So why are we not sending out people to go knock on doors and build those relationships? I think it all starts with relationships. The better relationships you have with families, regardless of what color they are, where they live, then the better the communication will be, and you'll be able to get that buy-in you need and have them be active participants in their children's education, because they value their children's education just like the other parents. They just may have a different way of doing it. Unfortunately, in some communities, email is not the way to get information to them or for them to get information out. A lot of times it has to be face-to-face and direct, and you need to build that relationship, and those are things that we're working to do. And prior to 215, we didn't have a student services department to focus on that relationship piece, but now we do have that. We have different people in that department that are out there who are trying to communicate, and they are bringing parents into the buildings to be a more active part of their children's education.
And how old is that service, the student service committee? Did you?
The student services department.
Okay, and how old is that department?
2000, so it's only been 2 years.
The reason why I ask is because that's some of the top concerns, getting information to parents and then taking parents' concerns very serious, and at least acknowledging that they have that information. So moving forward, how do you plan to work more collaboratively with that department so that these concerns will be met?
So working with that department, I think what we do is we make sure that our social workers and people that are working in student services, we also have some other support people that we have that'll be working in the buildings as well as in the community to help bridge that gap. So we have to make sure that they're also informed of whatever the information is that needs to go out, and make sure that they're relaying that to our families and getting feedback and bringing that back, and then we have to assess and evaluate if that's working. We it's really just about assessing what we're doing and how we can do things better, and actually going into those communities and asking them, how can we get communication out to you better? What'll be the best way for us to communicate with you?
I want to jump in for a second so I can ask a question here. First off, I want to say thank you for your service. Secondly, I want to say that there have been some questions asked about communication with community to the previous individual, Ms. Martha Gutney, that was here, and yourself right now as far as communications with the community. I want to go ahead and just state that when we talk about community, I think we're talking about two different segments of the community. The information that we've received from community members are from a different social economic level than the individuals, than other individuals in the community. So I noted in your application, you said that you all are working diligently to bridge communication and support gaps between the community, students and families living in public housing communities and schools. I think that's a separate segment of the community that we're not getting the information that's being regurgitated out to you all tonight, this morning, is about a different segment of the community. And I can appreciate the school board and the school system working to lessen the achievement gap in the same sense of working with those individuals that you want to increase communication with. So when we start talking about communication with the community, I hope that we're talking about the entire community and not just the ones that email us about things that affect them socially, economically, in their space, which would be a ball field or whatever it may be. And my question to you would be, can you talk a little bit about what you think the most important work of the school board is moving forward and how you're involved in that?
So in our efforts to close those opportunity gaps, I think the ICS is very important because it's going to look at all children, and it's going to specifically look at dismantling the system that was created to do exactly what it's doing, which is keep that gap right where it is. The gap is not something that just happened. I know you're aware of that, and it's been steadily increasing since 2009. So we definitely have to figure out those systematic issues that are causing this gap. People have to understand we're not trying to blame anybody. We're not trying to have anybody lose their job. But the biggest thing that we can do is hold people accountable. If you're not doing something, you need to have a conversation with that person and say, let's work on this. And if they're not willing to change or do something different, then we'll have to reevaluate that. And then we need the support from all stakeholders in the community. There is going to be pushback because when you're trying to dismantle this system, it's going to make other people feel uncomfortable, and it's not going to feel good to them. And that's typically the people who the system works great for. So in an effort to move things forward, people are going to have to be okay with feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but we're also going to have to do our part to give people the correct information so that they do understand exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to know that it's okay for you to ask questions and feel a little uncomfortable, but we're here to serve all kids. And we want them all to grow, and we're not trying to take anything from one set of kids and give it to another. We just want all kids to learn and become successful members of our community.
Again, thank you. I can appreciate your service. I can appreciate your lived experiences, including your work that you're doing with Housing Authority and seeing some of these kids on a face-to-face level, not only in the school system, but where they live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the yellow light's on, so I don't know that we're going to have an opportunity to ask another question, but really appreciate it, Shonda. And just, I'll step back a second. So what will happen is tonight, we will vote, and the way the vote will go is that we will first vote for 2 people with a 4-year term, and then there will be a second vote for the filling out Dr. James Lee's 2-year term.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So
thank you so much.
Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
very
great
much.
day.
Okay. Have you just introduce yourself, assume that everyone has read your application and the answers to all your questions, and then just introduce yourself, why you want to be on the school board, and then, as you saw, we'll open it up for questions from the city council members.
My name is John Moscone. I've been in Asheville since 1984. I've worked 21 years with elementary education, 10 of those years in parochial schools, 11 years for Asheville City Schools. Left in 2000. It was getting to the point where I really needed to change positions. And so then in 2005, I started working for South College and taught college for 10 years. I also worked for Biltmore State Winery for 19 years and retired 2 years ago.
I can start.
Okay.
So let me see if I can read my writing. When you were as to the question of would the employment of more African American teachers and administrators fit into your vision, you agreed that the school system should hire minority teachers and administrators and other staff members as a way to provide role models. And I was just wondering if you might elaborate further on this.
I worked at 3 different schools in Asheville City Schools. The first school was Randolph, which had a very high African American population of teachers. And I saw how the kids related differently to the different role models. It was really an eye-opening experience. I really enjoyed that experience. And then I moved to Dixon, and that's when the magnet schools came into play. I helped develop the magnet school for Isaac Dixon, which was Foxfire, which was a really open experience. And we also had a liaison at Isaac Dixon. And that liaison person was responsible for bringing parents to the school or making home visits. And it worked out really, really well. We saw more people coming in and volunteering in classrooms and also looking at some of the issues that they might have. So one of the things I would love to see is maybe more African American individuals being liaisons to some of the communities that are in our districts that really can pull some of those people who don't feel comfortable coming into the school system.
Reading your application, you clearly are aware of the opportunity gap, and one of the things that at least I fear is that people out in the community that the system does work for are going to be questioning how when closing the opportunity gap for our youth of color, how is that going to not take away from our other youth? And how would you communicate that or deal with it? It being a zero, do you believe it's a zero-sum game, or is there another way to talk about that?
No, I think that we can include everyone in the system on an equal basis. I don't feel we need to take away from anything in order to include people. What I found in the African American community, or even Hispanic community, that parents were afraid to come into the schools. And I think we need to make sure our doors to the schools are open and accepting. Do different types of social gatherings where we can get those individuals to come in. And as I said, that liaison person that we had at our school for a couple of years really was beneficial. And I would like to see that in all schools where we have a liaison. And it was a paid position at that time. And she would go and she would bring some of the people into the school system, making them aware of what their children's needs were academically, sitting down and having almost like a coffee session with them. Or she would make home visits and go into the homes and make sure those people were aware of their children's needs, how important it was to study at home. Even showing them how to create a study space within the home, which some of the parents didn't even understand how to do that.
Julie?
So you may have heard us talking earlier about ways in which the school system interacts with and provides information to or invites people to participate in decisions. I think, from my perspective, that can be done better. Again, I can't comment on the pushing information out because I don't get that information, but So talk a little bit about how you think the school system can do better at actually engaging parents and teachers in decisions that need to be made, and then what do you view the role of a board member in that conversation being?
I know one of the things that one of the schools that I worked at, if we could not get the parents to come in for a teacher conference, we were asked to go to some of the homes. And so some of the teachers were going out into the community, visiting homes of parents who either didn't have the transportation or the school was even providing transportation in some cases. And I think it's important to keep that communication going even through your teachers. I think it's important that the teachers keep that communication going about what's going on in the school, what changes are being made. Come out with even a monthly newsletter that I'm sure some of the schools are doing already that informs them of some of the changes that are going on in the school and their input for those changes.
And again, second part of that question is, what's the role, if you observe the communication happening and the attempts at engagement happening and you don't think they're effective, what do you view your role as a board member in that?
One of the things I would love to do is get into some of the schools, especially the elementary schools, because that's my background. In order to attend PTA meetings, maybe even making some home visits with the teachers if the teachers didn't feel comfortable going into the community, I would be willing to donate my time to help out some of the teachers in getting that communication and keeping it on an ongoing process.
There's a huge disproportionality in disciplinary actions that involve our Black and brown students in the justice system very early. What do you know about the school to prison pipeline? And as a board member, what do you envision happening as your role to stop that school to prison pipeline?
I'm not sure what the prison pipeline is.
Okay, so it's when there's disciplinary action caused on Black and brown students because of their behaviors that are sometimes seen as more criminal than just behaviors, and then it leads them into the courtroom, because a lot of times when simple fights and simple behaviors, we tend to have SROs in our school system now, and they are arrested and taken into custody. So that starts their life in the justice system, and it's an entanglement that happens throughout their life, and it's kind of cyclical throughout generations as well. So
when I was
information
a
on that.
teacher, I had some issues with some of my students. And what I would do is I would always write a letter home, tell the student what's in the letter, and then expect the parent to respond back to that letter. And I think that's important to make sure that the parents are aware of their child's behavior and how they deal with that behavior at home, or if they're seeing some of that behavior at home. So I think it's important to make sure that we keep the parents informed as far as what their child's discipline problems are and get them involved in helping the teacher sort out what those issues are.
But I think we've seen that those steps have been taken, or those steps have been kind of circumvented, and we immediately call authorities, law enforcement into our schools. So to ensure that this doesn't happen and to ensure that all children are receiving school-appropriate discipline, what is your role there?
I think one role is the fact that we need to make sure our guidance counselors are working with some of those students to work on those behaviors and how those students can curtail. And I'd be willing to come in and talk to some of these kids and spend some time in a small group discussing what their issues are, what their concerns are, why they're acting this way, and try to help them resolve and think of a better way to help them act.
I would think, kind of piggybacking here on Councilwoman Smith's question, what we would look for in terms of the board's activities is institutional change. We recently had a joint board meeting, and we looked at the discipline rates around minority students and white students, and minority students are being punished at multiple times greater rate than white students. What would you be willing as a board member to look at changing actual policies that are implemented at all the schools across the entire system to to reform the way that discipline is being managed in schools, because we know that the outcome is biased. And so just, having a meeting with a group of students is not a bad thing. Of course, that's a good thing. But as a board member, would you see your role as implementing policy change that affects an entire institution?
If the policies are not in line with what's going on in treating each student fairly, then yes, I think we need to look at policies and change some of those policies to, help students understand. Also, if a student is, I've always been under the impression that the punishment should fit the crime, so to speak, but we need to make students understand that their behavior is not appropriate for school and how to deal with that behavior. So I would like to see some policies put in place to help curtail some of those behavioral problems.
Okay.
So you have a background actually in teaching as well. I'm sure during that time, you probably had some interaction with the school board itself as a teacher. And so I'm curious, from if you think back during those times and now, were there things as a teacher that you wish the school board knew that you can bring to this position?
The school board actually started the magnet school system, which I think helped curtail the unbalanced schools, the population of minorities to Caucasian kids. And I think that was very helpful. I don't know how well that's being followed to this day or how much the magnet themes are being implemented. But I really think that we need to kind of look at some of those things and decide what needs to be changed.
I have a question. I can appreciate you applying in your service as a teacher. I was taken aback just a bit, and it's okay to some certain extent that you didn't know what the school to prison pipeline was, and that's a bit troubling to me in the sense of we have students in Asheville City schools that are being charged with crimes, handcuffed, and walked over to the magistrate's office. And that happens not just once or twice, it happens. Do you believe we should be charging our kids with crimes in the school system?
No, I don't think we should. I think that there's other ways we can deal with that through counseling, through intervention, through psychologists, etc. I think there's other ways we can do that. I don't know if that's the best way to deal with students by cuffing them. I think it's only reinforcing bad behavior sometimes, and I think that we really need to address some of those issues, not, cart students off in handcuffs.
Appreciate that, thank you. I think at this critical juncture in our community and the achievement gap, everyone will make decisions tonight about who they want to choose. I don't think I would be willing to support anyone who does not have that already predetermined knowledge. I can appreciate everything that you've brought to the table, but that is to not have that knowledge of what the school to prison pipeline is and everything.
I had never heard that term before.
I understand, but these are conversations that are happening in our school system, in our community now. And I don't know if I have time for someone to catch up. I can appreciate you though. And I know it doesn't sound earnest or honest, but I can appreciate you as being a teacher and selecting that role to serve your community. But we have greater needs in the Asheville City school system. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What will happen is we will have a vote tonight and fill out the 4-year terms and then and fill out Mr. Lee's 2-year term. Sure. So we'll vote on that tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time, all of you.
Thank you. Probably seen how this works. It's 15 minutes, so if you would introduce yourself and just tell us why you're interested in being on the school board, assume that all of us have read your applications and read all the answers to your questions, and then after you're finished introducing, then we'll open it up for questions from the council members. Thank you for
Thank you very much.
doing this. It's a lot of work just to get here.
Mayor. I'm a little nervous. I'm a little new to this process. Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. I have a child in Asheville City Schools. She's a 5th grader over at Isaac Dixon Elementary. Her big sister is a recent graduate of Asheville High. I started to attend board meetings for Asheville City Schools, work sessions, regular sessions, special meetings 4.5 years ago. And what brought me to the board meetings initially was 5 years ago, a little bit more than 5 years ago, on 2 separate instances, I saw 2 different staff members with 2 different developmentally delayed children of color dragging the children down the hallway at one of our elementary schools. When I saw this, what it was a situation where they had started to walk hand in hand. The adult was moving too fast. The child wasn't walking fast enough. The adult was firm. The child pulled back. The adult was insistent. The child sat down. The adult continued to pull the child another 10 feet, dragging the child down the hallway. I went to the appropriate people in Asheville City Schools and talked to Paul Parada, who used to be in charge of, I believe, the elementary schools curriculum, and spoke to various other people, spoke to school principals. Wound up speaking with former board member Matt Buys. My background at that time was being a camp director and using various discipline approaches to teach young 20-somethings, older teenagers, how to work with kids. And I was very lucky to be trained by somebody who is a model preschool, and I've got 100-something slides and discipline training material and approaches to discipline. So I thought maybe I could make change by speaking up, and committed to talk about ways to intervene with students or how to get their needs met. And I'm happy to share this. I'll just... I put in some effort on these topics. And for me, when I see, particularly it is the children of color more often who are being yelled at across the room and being disciplined disproportionately particularly with the limits on our training for our classified staff, which is what they call the hourly staff. It is hard to bring in staff, train them have the skills when they get frustrated to take a moment and breathe. Now, I think we are better off now than we were 5 years ago. But when I met with Matt 4.5 years ago, he said, well, your kid is moving over to Isaac Dixon. They won't see that. Katie Buys, who is now a middle school journalist, I believe, she said at the next table, oh, we've seen that. So it isn't something that's unique to one moment. So for me, I want to start with the approaches to discipline. That's most important. And when I've talked with leaders in the district, they've spoken about, or they've pointed out to me, our policy about physical interventions, which allows physical manhandling of students for escorting them. And they use that. So I think when we're talking about policy changes for the schools to prison pipeline, we need to look at, right now our policies are not differentiated for elementary school versus high school. We need to differentiate our approaches to discipline for those different age groups. And I probably over-talked my introduction, but that's what got me started, and I kept showing up at the work sessions and the general meetings, thinking that what I'd shared with Matt would be something that everybody would want to talk about. And so I guess I've just had the same conversations again and again and again, and I'm just eager to get the policy changes in place and get the resources directed so that we can address these issues for the system.
Question?
I'll
Go
go.
ahead, Jill.
I can start. Mr. Acebo, I'm glad to see that you've applied.
Thank you.
Mr. Acebo and I met not long after I moved here, and we actually share a common school in our history that was at the time one of the most innovative schools, I think probably in the country. So I appreciate that you come out of that tradition, and
I do.
I appreciate the answers to a lot of the questions. I'm going to ask the question that I think you've probably heard twice now, which is, when it comes to the school system, engaging parents and teachers in decisions that are being made. Talk a little bit about how you think that could be done differently or better than it's happening now, and what particularly is your role as a board member to make sure that effective engagement is happening.
There's a lot of things that we need to be doing in our schools. We've got parents who are not informed about big changes that are proposed. We've got a lot of references to we're making this change for the sake of equity, but not all of our teachers and our minority teachers in our schools would agree that a particular change is the right way to go. So what I would want to do as a board member is not shut down members of the community when they don't think that a particular approach is the right way. As an example, we had a recent board meeting where Asheville primary school parents of third graders arrived expecting to find out what the recommendation was and have an opportunity to speak. There was no public comment on the meeting agenda, so the board voted to add that at the beginning. And it happened in the space of 1 minute that it was approved to be added. The board asked if anybody would like to speak. Nobody was prepared. And then public comment was over, and then the superintendent gave her recommendation. And all those parents who were there were not given an opportunity to be heard. And that's even if they are white, middle class, upper class parents, we can't move forward as a school district if we silence our community. And so for me as a board member, I would want to amend that agenda so that they have an opportunity to speak, or the board chair can always allow someone to speak at her or his discretion. Is that enough of a answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
So do you feel that it's the role of a school board member to advocate for the Asheville City school system? Do you believe that is part of the role? Yes or no?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was not conceivable to me that you could answer no to that question. So for me, if I was a board member, you would hear from me again. I wouldn't fall into a black hole. I would be asking you for either support in spirit, or to help us make connections to leaders in the community. And I'm showing up as a person in a t-shirt and blue jeans, and I have my regular work shoes on, which have holes in them. At a meeting of the Asheville City Board of Education, I want to be somebody that everybody feels like they can talk to. I would be a board member who, after the meeting is done, would go and talk to the parents who are there, who maybe their needs weren't met or their concerns weren't addressed. I'm not going to hide behind Robert's Rules of Order and have and put up a wall between the board and the Asheville City Schools leadership and the parents who are so invested in making our schools better.
I'm going to jump in and ask a question. If anybody-
Please.
What are your thoughts on the achievement gap and how we should move forward with that?
That is a big question. We do need to listen to our teachers more. We have a lot of outside solutions. We get a lot of outside contractors coming in and telling us, what the low-hanging fruit is. With the achievement gap, we do need more teachers who are of color and more role models in the classroom, and there's research that backs up that has an improvement. We also need to be able to provide wraparound services that go beyond the schools. Right now, if we have kids who aren't having their basic needs met so that they are showing up ready to learn, feeling safe and comfortable. When it comes to specific educational standards and approaches, I really want to get teachers involved at looking at the Foundation's curriculum that we implemented 5 years ago and seeing what can be streamlined and what can be improved to increase the engagement of the students. And of course, the discipline. If we have kids who are removed from our schools when they are young or are feeling like everything that they do is wrong, it's really hard for them to feel positive about school. Should I keep going, or?
Oh, no, that was fine. I'll ask a follow-up then.
Okay.
What do you think, what, if any, role teachers play in reducing the achievement gap or increasing it?
While it's possible that, it is likely that some teachers are giving more attention to white students who are at a higher level than students who are not. There may be bias in the attention that students get. I think that's something that we'll look at through the ICS process. Would you repeat that question? I want to make sure that I've...
Sure, it was pretty much what, if any, relationship do teachers have in improving the achievement gap or reducing it? Excuse me, that was what you're saying, not improving it or, exacerbating it.
Right.
Worse. Sorry.
Yeah. I think that individual teachers make a huge impact on individual children. For me to point the finger at teachers and blame them is something I'm hesitant to do. One thing that I think we have to really look strongly at is our high teacher turnover, particularly at schools with larger minority populations. And so that lack of continuity, I see what the benefit of the continuity is at Isaac Dixon with children who the teachers know their families, they know aunts and uncles, they know the siblings, and they can help those kids along throughout. I don't think it's my place at this point to point fingers at individual teachers. I hope that's a fair response.
It is. Not pointing fingers, but what if there actually are teachers exacerbating the issue of the achievement gap, making it worse? What if there actually is evidence of teachers making it worse? Just curious, not pointing fingers, but if there are.
Right now, our principals and our superintendent are examining all of those data points. One thing that gets missed in this conversation a lot is that the cohort in a particular class has a huge impact on what those teachers' numbers are. So we need more observations, of course, in the classroom. That's a really tough question, and may I say I don't have all the answers. I have to really listen to, I think, first off, the teachers, because the teachers have a lot of wisdom that I think we miss frequently at the board level. And of course, we have to it's not the easiest thing to figure out and solve. Or, obviously it would have already been solved.
Councilman Kapoor?
Well, I'll ask this really quickly. I know you have a lot of time. We talked about getting community input. You talked about talking to teachers. A lot of times you're going to be in a situation where you're going to get all this information, and there'll be maybe a whole lot of folks who are pushing you to take a position one way or the other. And you may feel that personally you don't necessarily agree with where most of the folks are going. My question, I realize this, I'll stop, but you won't, the problem is you won't have the opportunity to answer it, so I guess I'll make this more of a point. But one of the difficulties that we face, obviously, as elected officials, and you would face if you're appointed to the school board, is even after you got that input, you may feel differently, and you will be in a spot where you may internally, you may need to say to yourself, I actually think we ought to be doing this instead of where the majority of folks are going. And the question I would say, or the point I would make here, is that takes a lot of fortitude to do, and it's very hard to do that at a
I'm no wallflower. I mean, there are going to be difficult choices to make, but I really need to listen to teachers and parents and not think that we've had a lot of leaders who are the smartest person in the room, and we have to, even if somebody's the smartest person in the room, they need to not behave that way.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I appreciate it. Mr. Carr. So the way this works is 15 minutes. We'll start out with you introducing yourself and telling us why you're interested in this role, and then we'll open it up for councilmen to ask you questions.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, council people. My name is James Carter. I am I can't say a lifelong resident of Asheville, but been here since 1983. Product of the Asheville City School System, started at Randolph and went through Hill Street, Asheville Junior High, and Asheville High. I still live in the area, of course. Went to UNC Asheville, graduated from there with a history degree, and currently I work with United Healthcare as a community outreach representative. My daughter went through the Asheville City School System. All of my siblings did. I have a niece and a nephew that have gone through as well, and nephews in the system still. My mother was an assistant teacher in the city school system for 27 years. My brother is a head custodian over at Claxton. So I have deep roots within the city school system, but also within Asheville itself. One of the reasons why I have submitted my application for this is because, frankly, one, I have a lot more time right now within my new role, and I'm not on any other boards. But also I see that there's an opportunity for improvement within the system and within the board itself, and I think that the board can be the driver within that improvement. There's a lot of, every day I hear something new about, the achievement gap, students, classrooms, the schools themselves, just from individuals that I know in the community. And I think that there's an opportunity that we miss at times by not going into the community enough to listen to what people have to say. So.
What do you possess that you believe will strengthen the board as it stands?
What do I possess? One, I have a lot of board experience. I have been the chair of the Literacy Council of Buncombe County's board, as well as Children First Communities and Schools. I also chaired the alumni board at the university for a total of 4 years. So I bring a lot of board knowledge, and I think that's very important, especially with a body this important, that there be some, you have that ability to run a meeting and interact with individuals within a meeting. As I said before, I'm also a product of the system, and a father of the product of the system. So I've had the opportunity to watch and be involved. I was the PTO president my daughter's 8th grade year at Asheville Middle. She hated it because she got called on by teachers to do things and didn't like it when I stood up in front of people and pointed her out. But it was, being able to interact with parents, being able to interact with students and teachers, not having that, fear almost. Sometimes individuals don't want to step out of their lane or their comfort area. That's something that I don't have a problem with. So.
Got a quick follow-up. So you have served on a lot of really good boards, very sophisticated boards, true governance boards, I think. And so my question is, do you, and these are also very, sophisticated organizations that don't need a lot of board direction. But my question really is, do you feel like it is the job of a board member if the organization either, isn't doing something the way that the board thinks it ought to be doing it, or could be doing it better? And you may have heard my question around sort of public engagement and how it seems like the school system can do better in that, and that's so not pushing information out, but engaging people in decision making. Talk a little bit about your role as a board member in ensuring that the school system does that either differently or better, if you share the view that it needs to be done differently or better.
I think one of the things that as a board member, so our direct report is the superintendent, okay? She is in charge of the teachers, the assistant principal, everyone. So we're not going to go in, I don't see my role as a board member is going in and telling her, you need to get rid of this person or you need to do this better. No. Our role is to almost act as I want to say checks and balances to an extent, but also to be there to provide feedback from the community, because there's a lot of times where I feel that the superintendent doesn't hear what the community is saying, but necessarily a board member might, and would be able to convey those thoughts to her. Also, can you?
Well, I mean, yeah. So if you're hearing from the community,
Right.
and other board members are hearing from the community that there is a problem,
Yes.
and they want change, do you view it as? And I don't mean change in a person. I mean change in a system, in a way that something is happening. Do you view it as your job collectively as a board to say to the superintendent, we think you need to do this differently going forward?
I think a perfect example right now is the achievement gap question. Okay, so there are a lot of people from the community who have lots of ideas and who have lots of feedback with that. I think that it is the board's right and duty to bring that to the superintendent to say, let's sit down and look at how things are going. Quite frankly, we have a lot of smart people in Asheville, and I think that sometimes we don't look in our own backyard before we start going out to find other solutions. And I think that as a board member, that is an opportunity to sit down with the superintendent and say, look, there are these people who have these ideas, there's these people who have these ideas. Let's bring those forward, and yes, it is our right to do that. So, but we're not running the system. That is not the board's job. It is really to work as liaison between the students, the community, and the superintendent, in my opinion.
Brian? Sorry.
Well, the only question I had written down for you was, you stated that you were unsure about the ICS for Equity program, and maybe you just elaborate a little further on that.
Elaborate on my unsureness of it?
Sure. Maybe you've become more sure of it since you wrote this.
Well, I mean, I have done more research, and that is still one of the things that I feel has not been presented in a clear enough manner to the community as a whole. If I'm having trouble finding information on either ICS's website, the Asheville City School System's website, which they have some great graphics, but they're not telling me anything. And I'm not saying I'm the smartest person in the room, but I know how to search, and I know how to look for information. So if I'm having those problems, I can only imagine what other people are having those same problems. There have been two things that I've ever seen, and one was in Mountain Express, one was in Citizen Times. That's it, and that was in 2017. I would love to see something else. I need to see, all right, we've been in this for a year and a half now, where the system paid for this. Let's get some accountability. I know that there was a year to get some things set up, but all right, we've had that year. Let's move forward. Let's actually give some information to the community on this is where we are. I know it is a system and not a something that you can just look at and go, okay, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and it's going to fix it like that. Frankly, one of my questions was, did we ever reach out to other school systems like ours that have used ICS before this was made, this decision was made? I'm all about doing research. As of right now, I cannot tell you that I know any more about ICS than I did when I wrote that answer.
Okay. Thank you.
The school system has recently started a collaboration, an equity collaboration with members of the larger community. Are you familiar with the work, or what are your thoughts about that opportunity? If you think it's an opportunity, maybe.
I think that there is a great opportunity there. If I'm not mistaken, it's made up of commissioners, yourself, a couple other individuals within the community as well. Community collaboration, is that what we're talking about?
Right. I mean,
Yes.
It's called an equity collaboration.
Well, equity collaboration. So I think that's a great first step. It's honestly something that should have been done a long time ago. I think that there will be some good information that comes out of it, but also I would like to see a little bit more about the group itself and what their mandate is and what they are planning to come up with as a whole. I mean, I know you can't fix it all by yourselves, so.
Thank you.
So given that kind of piggybacking off of that question, I mean, you really can't do this all by yourself, and oftentimes the public expects you to be able to do it by yourself, right? Mm-hmm. They expect it of us, they expect it of you, and so kind of given your experience here in Asheville in your current role, what allies or what groups, or what would you be able to bring to, in terms of additional resources, not just from yourself, but in terms of other community members, other community groups, the business community, et cetera, to be able to attack some of these issues? Because obviously, I think anyone who looks at this would agree, this is not something the school board or the school district can deal with, whether it's the achievement gap or otherwise.
Well, in my history here, I worked for the Chamber of Commerce for several years. I've worked at the university. I've worked at the hospital, one of the hospital systems. I know a lot of individuals within the community. There's a lot of opportunity for buy-in from different groups. One of the things, though, that I would love to see if I am on the board would be that the board go out into the community more. It's one thing to have a board meeting up at central office. It's another to take it into the community where individuals who can't make it there. We have a number of community centers around the city where we could easily hold within that community center a board meeting to address concerns from the community. That's something that we don't do enough of, in my personal opinion. I would love to see the board members meetings retelevised again, or live streamed like they were under Charlie. There's opportunity that we can bring ourselves to incorporate more individuals. I personally, like I said, know a number of individuals within the business community that are concerned as well. And they see concerns in that what our students are, people who are still here, what do they have to do, jobs, housing, so forth. How is that affecting our students with their parents and home situations? So there are a lot of individuals who have expressed concerns, and that would be my role, is to help bring them their concerns forward.
Do you think you'd be able to do? Are those folks you talk to? Are, I know they express concerns. Do you think they're willing to step up?
Yes,
if given the right.
Very much so. If I asked.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that in terms of what do you think has stopped them from stepping up to this point?
Honestly, I think at some point it's their right person hasn't asked them, or they've never been asked. Okay, that's true about a lot of people. They don't do things because they're not asked. They might not see the information. They might not see the opportunity that there is, or the lack of an opportunity that someone has, until they know a little bit more. And that goes back to the education part of it, is getting out in front of those individuals and letting them know more about what's going on.
One quick question, if anyone has.
I know it's about
The yellow lights on.
Okay, the yellow light's on, right, okay. Well, thank you very much. We will vote on this tonight.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it. It's a lot of work just to even get to this stage, so appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Powell, the way this works, welcome,
Thank you.
is that you will have 15 minutes, and we'll ask you to just introduce yourself and tell the council why you're interested in this role, and then we'll open it up to the council members to ask questions.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. This is a great honor. I am Scott Powell. I'm the Director of Finance with the Metropolitan Sewage District of Buncombe County. I have a 12-year-old, fixing to be 13, in the Montford North Star Academy. As far as myself, I am a product of the public school system. As you saw in my essay responses, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up in the inner city schools. I was able to graduate, and I had the opportunity going to Tennessee State University or the University of Tennessee. I chose the University of Tennessee because it had, at that time in 1987, one of the best accounting curriculums for a public institution. I graduated and went into public accounting, and then went into the nonprofit governmental side of accounting. Now, as to that, working in the municipal entity, public service is one of those, things that if we can bring something to the table, we should. And currently, I am on the audit committee for the city of Asheville. I am treasurer for the PTO for the North Star Academy. So that's a little bit about myself.
All right. Anyone want to start out, Julie?
Sure, I'll dive in. I don't know if you've been in here the whole time, but I've been sort of asking the same question. So.
No, actually, I came in about 3 minutes ago,
Okay,
so I
great.
did
So
hear
then-
one of your questions. I didn't hear all of your questions.
So we've been hearing a lot from parents, I would say over the last couple of years, about process concerns at the city school system, so how decisions get made and the degree to which parents and teachers are involved in those decisions.
Absolutely.
When we hear about it, it means that from the parents' perspective, it hasn't worked well. So that's sort of the premise of my question, which is that it seems like there's an opportunity for the school system to do better at engaging parents and teachers in decision making. So
Yes.
first question is, what do you think about that, and do you see that same opportunity? And then the second and really more important question is, what do you see the role of a board member or of the board being in bringing any change to the way the school system does that, engages parents and teachers?
Okay, well, the first part of that question actually dovetails behind the second part of that question, is transparency. When you look at Buncombe County School System's website and what's on the agenda, everything that's being discussed is out there for public consumption, i.e. all the presentations, all the items that are going for action, all budget amendments, everything is out there for public consumption. Now, I've been talking to the vice chairman for the past 6 months to say, hey, you know, you want public engagement to address all issues, how about putting all that information out on your website? They're starting to get there, but it's taken 6 months. So pure transparency is one of those things. You know, to ask a parent to come to the work session before those items are being discussed is hard. You know, we've had issues here real recently, specifically with Vance, that if those items were out there for public, you know, comment, you know, truly out there for public comment, I think, you know, engaging those parents a lot earlier would have prevented some of this, what's going on up at central office. And as a parent, you know, dealing with Montford North Star Academy, we've had the same type of issues, you know, and that's one of those things that as a parent, and working for a municipal entity, you know, transparency is a paramount of if you're getting public, you know, public buy-in. That's one of the first things I think the school board could do in relation to addressing some of the, you know, some of the issues there. Now, as a school board in general, you know, what I think, you know, you're appointing the members, but we represent the children and the parents of the school system. And as that representative, we, as board members or potential board members, need to be accessible to all parents. Listen to what the parents have to say. Find out if there's something that we can provide that is currently not being, you know, provided, or, you know, maybe some outside the box thinking to address some of the issues that we, you know, that are going on in the school system. I mean, right now what we're dealing with is the achievement gap, which is a very big issue. You know, but, you know, that's just one data point. You know, my question is, if we're having that big of an achievement gap, and we are, when you're looking at the graduation rates, they're not telling us the same story. So the question is, why isn't it telling us the same story? You know, when we're looking at the graduation rates of all children in Asheville City school systems, they're exceeding the national averages. Based on the 4-year cohort of the 2017. And right now, when you're looking at the graduation rate for, you know, 2017 for just the black child, you know, it's 83.3%, 83.1%. You know, national average is 77.8%. You know, that is, you know, that's something that is a, you know, is a positive, but we can't just stop there. You know, my child has what I call learning obstacles. Okay, she has dyslexia, she has ADD, and she has executive function issues. The trifecta. Now, with the last one, that prevents that child from doing good on those standardized tests. But how does she perform in school? She's straight A student. So that test is not indicative to what our children know. And we need to ask ourselves, is that test that North Carolina State issues to our children, is that representative of all the other tests that are in the state, or excuse me, in the nation? And that answer is no, they're not. You know, the way I look, being an accountant, I'm a numbers man. I like numbers. And what we're seeing is that in the 6th grade EOG, there was more writing or reading involved than it was actually doing math. I mean, the math was there, but you had to do a lot of reading. You know, math is supposed to be the universal language. Now, when you compare our EOG to Virginia's EOG, there's a lot of math questions, just straight out math questions, and then there's some of those verbal questions as well. So there's a lot of things that we need to get together and look at to address a lot of the issues that are going on. But I think the board members should be open to all of the parents and children that are expressing issues. In addition to, we need to be looking at what is the cause of us being deficient and trying to address those deficiencies. And the school is trying. I mean, they've implemented a lot of plans, ICS is being one of them. But, you know, as the gentleman previously stated, that, you know, it's been in place for a year and a half. And then when you look at the last 2 years achievement gap, those achievement gaps have been the greatest over the last 5 years. Now, is there a cause and effect? I doubt that very seriously. You know, any plan being in a year and a half, you know, it hasn't bear fruit yet. But there's a lot of plans that can be implemented, and public engagements is one of those things that is paramount for the success for all of our children.
I have a question. You kind of sparked my interest. You talked about graduation rate of African American Black students to other counterparts, and the correlation between the achievement gap, and it may help me follow what you're saying,
right,
which is that there is no correlation between the graduation rates and
well,
the achievement gap?
I would say that when you're looking at, for instance, the math for high school, 2018, there was a 60-point gap in the correlation. Now, 2017, if I'm not mistaken, it was like a 54% gap. But yet the gap between the white child and the black child in graduation, I'm just talking about graduation rates, it's only 6%. Now, me looking at data, and I look at data a lot, I would expect there would be a bigger disparity there. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that there's not a big issue in relation to the performance gap. There definitely is. But when I'm looking at that data, I'm saying, what's going on here? There's something else. There's other points that either a teacher or the administration are looking at that is having an impact on the graduations. Because if it was just the achievement gap, we would have a tremendous problem in Asheville, and we do in relation to that gap.
Let me ask you this, since you talked about data, is that, and you may know because I don't know, is that same data that you talked about, does that take into account the individuals at an earlier age that actually drop out of school before they get to high school, or kids who have actually been put into the criminal justice system that no longer attend?
Okay, the 4-year cohort is tracking a child from a freshman through graduation. So in that particular data point, if someone is going out of that cohort, that could have an impact in relation to those percentages, yes.
So it doesn't track the folks who actually, before they get to high school, drop out?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And so I'm not going to make any assumptions of those individuals, but...
I'm not making any assumptions as well.
No, I understand. So what is your personal, what do you think the issue is as far as what you talked about?
In relation to
the achievement gap,
and
the graduation rates.
Okay, well, to be honest with you, I don't know. And I would like to get behind that data to find out what's going on there. To the extent of the achievement gap, I think that, whereas the school system has tried many programs, such as, at Hollis Fletcher, year-round education. I mean, there's data out there that states that does help with the achievement gap. There's programs out there. I'm from Tennessee. In Memphis, there was a program that was called Pre-Head Start, and that was engaging children not at 4-year-olds, but engaging parents and children at 2-year-olds, and that had had positive impact on the achievement gap. in Nashville, or in Tennessee, but specifically in Nashville, there was a program in the 90s, it's called STAR program. And what that program did is that it made class sizes smaller. So the actual, imparting of information was, readily available to those kids in relation to learning. What I have seen, I'm old school. I'm 50 years old. And taking that in.
Be careful. Just be careful about that.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying is that what children are learning today, some of that stuff we didn't learn until we were in high school in 7th grade. And I'm going with my child, actively engaging my child in relation to, homework. What I have seen is that when I was in elementary school, when she was in elementary school, you have 10 ways to learn one problem in math. And then you're expecting that kid to translate all those concepts into trying to, score good on an EOG. I think EOGs are part of the problem. I think, actively engaging the public to help address this issue is one of those as well.
Anything?
If nobody else has a question, I'll jump back in. I was
Okay,
trying to
go
give
ahead.
everybody a chance. So I think, I think it's interesting to see, to look at data and know that when we talk about the achievement gap, the biggest separation between black and white students happens and occurs before you actually get to high school. Absolutely. It'd be interesting to see, maybe, and I'm not a numbers person, but maybe, the correlation which you was trying to make, maybe it's not as solid as it could be. I mean, even though we have the numbers of the graduation rates.
First and foremost, I wasn't making a correlation. I was making a point that where we have this big achievement gap, we have another data point that tells a completely different story. And what we need to do is we need to merge that data together.
Right. What I'm getting at, though, is that the achievement gap, the largest point in the achievement gap happens before an individual comes to high school. Mm-hmm. So the individuals that you get in high school, mm-hmm. when they start looking at the achievement gap, it is a different measurement. Mm-hmm. And so you might be capturing numbers from individuals that are graduating almost at equal rates to their white counterparts, but these are different individuals, not taking into account all those individuals you lost in the earlier years. That's all I was saying.
No, and point well taken.
Thank you very much. We will vote on this tonight.
Wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And we'll, let's not start. Okay. We'll have 15 minutes and ask you to introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in this role, and then we'll open it up for the council members and people to ask you questions. Okay.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. As I emailed some of y'all earlier, I had jury duty this morning, so I wasn't 100% sure I would make it today, but thanks to the Buncombe County Courthouse, they've rescheduled my jury duty for another day. So. I'm Melissa Cletus. I am an Asheville City School parent. My oldest child is set to graduate from SILSA this year and will be attending East Tennessee State University in the fall. And I have been he enrolled in Asheville City Schools in 2006, where I still, at Claxton Elementary, where I still have a daughter. I'm I think going for the record of longest parent at Claxton Elementary School, have outlasted 95% of the staff at this point. I'm also a financial advisor and have a small boutique financial firm here in Asheville. And prior to my 8 years in finance, I had a master's in education and worked for Buncombe County Schools as both a classroom teacher and a part-time teaching assistant.
Does anyone want to start?
Well, first let me. I've got a daughter who's in Estes Elementary and in the county schools, and so first off, thank you for the time you spent. It's a very difficult job to do. And so I'm kind of curious about that in terms of, you know, your experience there, and what, if anything, did you learn from that experience and from teaching that you could actually that you could bring kind of directly as a school board member?
Sure. It's an incredibly difficult and sometimes unthankful job. I left teaching because I had the same problem I think a lot of teachers have, is I became a parent, and when my second child was born, I was looking at the cost of full-time childcare for 2 children versus my salary as a teacher, and basically my monthly income would pay for childcare. So it was like, well, does this make sense anymore? Probably not. And teachers have to face that reality every single day. You know, can I afford to keep doing this because my salary of $28,000 a year isn't going to pay for the high cost of living in this town when we don't have a lot of options for affordable childcare for families. Also, on the flip side of that, working as a part-time assistant, when I took some time off and went back to work as a part-time assistant, it was really interesting to see the dynamic, not as the lead classroom teacher, but now suddenly being the part-time assistant that's there for 4 hours a day, trying to come in and help the teacher in any way possible. And often your role is to try and fill in the gap for kids that have such a high need of attention that the teacher can't give them. So that kind of changed my whole thought process when I was on the other side of that coin.
Sure, I'll dive in with my question. Again, you may have heard it, but we have heard a lot in the last couple of years from parents and teachers who feel like the school system has not done a very good job, as good a job as maybe it ought to have, in terms of engaging parents and teachers in decision making. So first question is, I'd be interested in your opinion on that, and whether the school system could do more to engage parents and teachers in making big systemic decisions or big decisions that impact individual schools. And then the second piece is, what do you view your role as a board member in terms of perhaps pushing the school system to do something differently? If there's a pattern of not, particularly on this issue of engagement, not engaging parents and teachers sufficiently, what's your job as a board member to effect change on that point?
Sure. There is, I think, the 2 biggest issues that Asheville City Schools faces. One is the achievement gap, and secondly is a lack of transparency and trust from the community. We've seen that throughout this year. Every time there's something that's happening, parents feeling like they're not a part of the process and feeling that their voices are not heard. And I think that's one of the most important roles of a board member, is to actively listen and to get the voices of all stakeholders. That can be difficult to do when there is, not a lot of opportunity for the board. The way the structure currently is to hear from voices. Yes, we advertise that the board meeting is open, the work session is open. The work session is half the size of this room. So if parents actually showed up, they're not going to have space to even be there to listen to what's happening in the room. And it's also important to make sure that you're not listening to just the loudest voices, because there are a lot of parents that have a lot of strong thoughts, but they can't be there. And so we have to look at what is the structure to make sure that every voice is heard, and that all parents and all stakeholders, staff, teachers, all feel like their opinions are validated and heard and part of that process.
And as a board member or as a board, do you feel like it's your role to insist that there be change in terms of how that engagement happens?
Absolutely. I think we have to look at, if you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? That's the definition of insanity. So we have to think about, okay, we want to focus on equity and inclusion. Well, how is the board operating in a way to make sure that we are following that guideline as well? So we have to be inclusive, and we have to make sure that we're not just posting out there, parents, please come to this meeting, but what are we doing to think about how can we meet parents where they are? And that means perhaps we're not meeting, at our typical work session room, and are we going to community places where people can be there and they can make it more accessible to everyone?
What do you see, how do you see the role of city council relative to the school board?
I think it's something that's really important, because what's happening within our school system with this achievement gap is not happening in isolation. of the school system. This is a community problem, and so we need to engage the entire community, and that means partnering with City Council to see what are the policies and structures in place, not just in the school system, but within our city that are impacting students at home and families at home before they come into the school doors. So I think it's something where there needs to be a strategic partnership where the city and the school board are working side by side to address these issues.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up. So you have a small business that you're running, I assume, I don't know whether you have a staff, et cetera. Have you, what's your sense of your time commitment for the school board, and how does that fit into your work life?
Sure. I'm fortunate as a small business owner of having a flexible schedule. I've, for the last 5 years, served on the board for the Junior League of Asheville, and this year serving as president, which tonight will be my second to last board meeting that I'll be chairing. So I'm looking forward to that concluding in May. But that has been something that I've been able to manage with my work life, trying to fit in that schedule, which that is a commitment of, well, you kind of go in thinking it's going to be one-time commitment and finding real quickly that it's another. So for the last week, I've been trying to help our treasurer get our 990 together and getting that filed. I'm probably spending about 40 hours a month in a volunteer position. So once that is done, I see no problem with time commitment.
So you said that you fully, you're committed, you support the decision for the Asheville City Schools to accept ICS program, but you've been in the parent community for a very long time. What do your peers in the your peer group within the parent community think about ICS?
Well, I think that it's not necessarily about ICS in particular, it's that the school board is trying to take an active role into addressing the equity issues. And I think that we're seeing that in our school communities as well. I'm very proud of one of the endeavors at Claxton is we have the Claxton Social Justice League, which is trying to engage the community at large on a variety of issues. We've talked about race, we've talked about gender identity, and trying to bring in parents and outside community members, because it's not just parents that matter, it's the whole community at large that we need to get engaged and move forward, because there's a long and difficult history in Asheville when it comes to race in our schools. My husband attended Asheville City Schools and can still remember a lot of the same issues we're having today when he was a student at Asheville City Schools. And I think we have to overcome not just the hurdles of what we have today, but there's bias from parents that live here that are sending their kids to these schools that can remember what it was like when they were there. And so we have to make sure we're trying to not just erase and forget all this history, but that's got to be a part of it as we move forward. There were years of policy and structure put in place very intentionally, and we have to be very intentional how we're going to break that down to make sure all students can move forward.
Mm-hmm. I hear that, but I want to know specifically about this program because it's really huge. And I can take it that you've been in the parent community for a very long time. You talked about the history there. And I'm sure that when you stepped up to take this position, you got some direct feedback about this specific thing because it is huge. So could you tell me a little bit about those conversations and how you are going to be an influence in moving us towards different phases?
Right, I think that goes back to that transparency and parents feeling not being a part of the conversation, because most people couldn't tell you a whole lot about ICS and the equity program that we're moving forward with. Yes, it was adopted. There's not a lot of information out there for Asheville City parents to find. There's not a lot of information. Meeting with the city school board, you know, the answer was like, well, it took me 48 hours at a workshop to really even wrap my head around it. So how can parents get their head wrapped around that if we don't have the opportunity to get that information? So that goes back to that transparency issue of how is information being, given to parents, and what was the due diligence process in selecting that program. I'm just happy to see that the city is looking at an actual way to address it, whether it's the right program or not.
How do you feel? Is it the right program or not?
Because I couldn't say it because there's not enough information out there about, how is this going to work? What's it going to look like? What are the data points from other schools? It's hard to even find another school that you can identify that has gone through this same program to get results to make a comparison to.
I just had a question about sort of communication, because we've been talking a lot about communication this morning, and there's a lot about engagement, and so and you're the last person we're interviewing today, and so one of the things I couldn't help but notice kind of throughout this process is I realized we were doing it in the morning during the weekday, but there were like no more than 10 people in this room at any given point today. I didn't see the business community. I'm not sure if there's parent-teacher organization groups over here, and this decision that we're making here is probably one of the biggest drivers of where the school district may go. And there's been good journalism about it. There's one journalist in here. There's one journalist in here, and right. Folks may be looking at this online. And I guess where we face similar problems here on council, where we sometimes try and meet people out there and try and get input, but oftentimes we don't get that. Right, and so there's part of me too that kind of hears a lot of this right now, but is also saying, okay, well, we also need folks to step up as well, and I get that there may be barriers, and I'm just wondering in terms of that kind of duality from your perspective as a parent, and now someone who wants to serve on the board, how do you get past that? Is this really a communication issue from your perspective, or is this something where we're not seeing folks step up when they need to step up?
I think that's a difficult question to ponder, because in fact, when I put my name in the hat for Asheville City School Board, I can tell you that the only people that know that I'm doing this are the people that I've actually had a conversation with and told them, not because that they were engaged in the process to know who's actually up for City School Board and when is that happening. And and I know Mountain Express covered it in their paper, but I could probably count on one hand the number of people that said, "Oh, I saw in the paper that you're doing this." So we do have to look at what are, not just those barriers, but how are we communicating? But again, it comes back to, I think, if what we're doing isn't working, then we have to evaluate how are we sending those invitations and communications. You have to evaluate what we're doing to try and help engage. And you can't just assume people are going to find it. We have to be thinking about, well, clearly what we're doing isn't working, so what is another step we can take? And I don't know the answer to that. That's, some thoughtful brainstorming to try and figure out how to get the business community engaged, community members at large to engage, folks that don't have kids in the city school system, but they're still part of the city school district. How are we getting those people engaged?
So we know that the achievement gap is huge. It's bigger than academic performance. What do you think causes unequal and inadequate educational opportunities for Black kids?
Right. We also know that the disciplinary actions for Black students are way off from what we see for white students. They may have the same issues, but the disciplinary actions that are taken are not equitable at all. And so I think part of that is looking at not just the achievement gap, but what is it within our structure? Do we need to be addressing implicit bias that all people carry, whether they want to admit it or not? Is that impacting what's happening at schools for our teachers and staff that are not even aware that that bias exists, but exploring that?
Okay. Well, your light's going to go off any minute. So thank you very much. Appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and we'll be voting on this tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll adjourn this special session.